Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with Dr. Jessie Mahoney.
And Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are physicians and leaders who are also trained in coaching, yoga, mindfulness, and integrative medicine.
We are also mothers, spouses, sisters, daughters, aunts, and friends.
In this podcast, we share candid, heart-centered, loving, science-based, thoughtful, and often fun conversations about the challenges life throws at us.
With our collective experience of over 30 years in physician and personal wellness, we reflect and offer pearls of wisdom for navigating life's challenges with more ease.
From parenting, marriages, money scarcity, cancer survivorship, uncertainty, challenges in practicing medicine, we cover it all.
We invite you to refresh your perspective and empower yourself with mindset, mindfulness, and other well-being tools that actually work. A quick reminder that nothing in our podcast is medical advice.
Today is going to be a fun episode on moving beyond over responsibility, over functioning, overwhelm, and over busy. Today's episode is going to be a solo cast with yours truly, inspired and dedicated to many of my clients who struggle with over responsibility, over functioning, overwhelm, and over busy. Imagine a life without feeling over responsible, without over functioning, without overwhelm, and without feeling over busy. It's possible. Other people and larger systems benefit when we take on everything as our job. In the short term, they do not benefit actually in the long term. And neither they nor we benefit in the long term. We actually end up exhausted and depleted and overwhelmed, overbusy, overcommitted, and overfunctioning when we take on everything as our job. The massive exodus from medicine, especially with overfunctioning women, currently is an example. In 2021, 120,000 physicians left medicine, apparently. And the rate of burnout in my specialty, pediatrics, which is known to be one of the more fun specialties, went from 30% to over 50% in the last 2 to 3 years. And I believe a lot of this comes from the fact that as women, and women physicians in particular, but any high-achieving women, we're so high-functioning and so capable. We take on everything as our responsibility and our job. We show up toxically independent, meaning we do everything ourselves because we're so good at it, so fast at it, and can accomplish so much. And then we end up bitter and resentful and exhausted and burnt out. And so while this is an efficient strategy for the world and everyone else, they do all benefit. We don't benefit. And in the end, the world doesn't benefit and everyone else doesn't benefit either. And what I would love to be the outcome of this episode is that we don't get to that place, because I think that there are things that we can do. And when we show up as these overfunctioning, overresponsible, overbusy humans, this actually becomes other people's expectations of us and our own expectations of us. And when we can no longer do it, we end up feeling like we failed. We end up feeling inadequate. And we then try to do more to feel less inadequate. And things cycle and cycle and cycle. We can accomplish more and more until we fizzle and burn out. And so my invitation today is to consider what is actually our jobs. Our jobs in all of our roles: mothers, daughters, siblings, parents, leaders, physicians, lawyers, whatever your roles might be. What is your actual job? And by that, I do not mean what is your job description. And I do not mean what do other people think is your job. And I actually do not mean what do you at this moment think is your job. My invitation today comes from a session that I did with an extremely lovely client a few weeks ago, and we talked about what her job was in all of those roles. And what we discovered for her was that when she actually defined her job as each of these roles, and we'll talk a little bit about how to do that, she felt like her job was very much doable. And when she felt that way and thought that way and let go of what was not hers to hold, the noise quieted. The over everything went away. Overwhelm, overbusy, overresponsible, overfunctioning, overcommitted. Because what was actually her job, focusing on what was actually in her control, changed everything. So, with that, how do you get to that point? How do you begin to see what is your job? And can it actually melt this over everything? So I invite you to make a list of the roles that you have, potentially mom, wife, partner, child, sibling, parent, leader, physician, lawyer, whatever it might be, and try to divide them up really cleanly and clearly. And so if in your work you are a leader and a physician or a nurse practitioner, or you are a partner in a law firm and being an attorney, add those in as separate roles because the separateness brings clarity. And with clarity, this is where we can begin to see what is actually our job versus what we have maybe potentially decided is our job or our role. And so I invite you then to go through each of these categories. What is actually your job? What is actually your responsibility? Making sure that everything you put on that list is something that is actually yours to own and yours to hold, and also in your control. That it's not an outcome that's out of your control. So, for example, as a physician leader, we were often told that access results were in our control, or patient satisfaction scores, we were responsible for that. But we couldn't possibly be responsible for the outcome. We can be responsible for thinking about it and trying creative things out and brainstorming and teaching our colleagues certain things or building programs, but we are not responsible for the outcome. And so when you look at it differently, you actually begin to feel much more in control, much more calm. And this is where the over everything goes away. Because when you start to realize that solving problems, giving the answers to problems is not actually your responsibility. It's the effort, it's the intention, it's the approach that's your responsibility. I encourage you to think about what is your job. And one of the key pieces about this is something that I talk about all the time in this podcast and all the time as a coach, and it's word choice. And thinking very clearly, your job is not to fix or manage or control things that are out of your control. Your job is not to have someone do this. Your job is not to make someone behave in a certain way or show up in a certain way. And so being really clear about the language is very, very helpful. The other piece that's really, really helpful is thinking about what is not your job side by side as to what is your job. And so when something comes into your mind about what is your job, quickly consider, is this my job or is this not my job? Whose job might it be? Maybe it's no one's job. And so I think having those lists side by side also really gives you clarity. And this exercise can actually lead you to love your life as it is. I often say that the group Ongoing Presence, my small coaching group, is fantastic for people who want to learn to love the life they have. They might find that there are things in that life that do need to be changed. Maybe they're slight tweaks, maybe they're huge tweaks, maybe they can't learn to love the life they have. But a lot of that work is exercises such as this, where you're beginning to see clearly how you are approaching your job and where you are contributing to making what might be already hard, being a physician in 2024, harder, or being a mom or caring for elderly parents. All of those things are hard. And the way we approach them can make them harder. And we very much don't see this, especially if we are super accomplished. We just keep doing and doing. In fact, we rarely pause to consider and to see. So beyond looking at what your job is and looking at what your job is not, and thinking clearly about the words that you use for things that are or are not your job, One additional point I wanted to make at the outset is having someone there, such as a coach, to help you work through this is really, really powerful. So if you, perchance, bring up something that is not actually in your control, but your brain offers to you that it is, you have someone to point it out. I was working with someone yesterday who said, how come I don't see these things myself? And it's not a deficiency of us, it's the way the human brain works. And so, as I always mention, I am a product of my product. I continue to get coached. I continue to have a coach help me see what's going on in the back of my mind when I may not be appreciating how it's influencing how I show up in the world. And if you want to function at the highest level, and if you want to enjoy your life to the degree most possible, given the life that you have and the things that happen that are out of your control, this process is incredibly useful as a tool and as a resource. And while it might feel indulgent, it might actually be one of the most essential things you can gift yourself if you wish to live a happy, healthy, accomplished, productive, and meaningful life. And a reminder that athletes all have coaches because they want to perform at the highest level and live their life to the fullest and perform in their sport to the fullest. And that most of us who are high achievers, whether doctors, lawyers, people trying to work in nonprofits, trying to make a big difference in the world, we also need that clarity and support. We can do it on our own, but it's exhausting. And we might find ourselves in that pile of people who are burnt out and potentially leaving something that we love. I wanted to begin with things that might not be your job, or we clearly know are not your job. So number one on this list is keeping everyone else happy, pleasing everyone else, and potentially keeping them comfortable. This is true whether they're your patients, your children, your family. It's not possible to keep everyone happy, and it's not your job. Making people feel a certain way is also not your job. We're taught as kids that we can make people feel a certain way. They're going to feel the way they feel. And living with someone who is neurodivergent is actually fascinating because someone whose brain works differently than you feels differently than you about something you said than you ever even imagined. And so it's a bit presumptuous of us to think that we have the power to make someone feel a certain way. We can hear their feedback. We can speak with intention. We can act with intention. We can bring energy of love and kindness and care for the world in all that we do. But we can't control how other people receive it. We can't protect people. I think many of us as parents want to protect our children. We can put guardrails. We can advise them. We can teach them. We can show them. We can model. And we can have boundaries when needed. But we can't actually protect them from the harms of the world. We also, even though we're physicians, cannot fix all broken things. Now, potentially as a surgeon, we do go in and fix things, just like we can repair something with needle and thread if there's a hole in fabric, for example, or duct tape repairs things. But we can't fix all broken things, and that's not our job. And I think many of us as moms think that is our job. And actually, we'd love to be able to fix broken things. Many of us who have aging parents want to fix broken things. Many of us want to fix all the broken things for our patients. We think our job is to handle everything on the list, but that's actually not possible or reasonable as an expectation. And so we'll talk a little bit about what is your job, but fixing all things is not your job. And here's where the language is so important. Judging others is also not our job, whether it's judging our partners, judging our parents. Judging others is not helpful. Owning other people's challenges, also not helpful. Many of us want to own our children's challenges as our own. We can help, and we'll get into what is our job afterwards, but owning the challenge is not our fault and it's not our responsibility. And being very clear about what you believe in your brain is your fault and letting go of things that are not your fault is also incredibly powerful. Owning other people's outcomes is also not our responsibility, especially with patients. We can educate, we can encourage, we can motivate, we can teach, we can model, but we can't make anybody do anything. Changing anyone's behavior not our responsibility and not our job, whether we are their parent, whether we are their children, whether we are their doctor. We can't change their behavior. We can encourage, we can motivate, we can inspire, we can educate, we can recommend, we can be aware, we can share our knowledge, but it's not our job to change anyone's behavior. It's also not our job to convince people. I think many of us in pediatrics were taught that it was our job to convince people to get antibiotics for something or not take antibiotics if they don't need it. It's our job to convince them to get vaccines. That is not our job. Our job is to educate. Our job is to teach. Our job is to inspire, to facilitate, to advise, to partner with them, for example. But our job is not to convince them or make them do something. Interestingly, medicine has judged us on our effectiveness at this, which is actually not in our control. Now, potentially, they're trying to judge us on the effectiveness of our teaching, motivating, and inspiring, but they're judging us on the outcome, not on our ability to do that. And the people that we are teaching and motivating and inspiring, their response to what we do is actually not a reflection of what we do or how we do it. It's not a one-to-one correlation, and judging us on that makes us then take responsibility for things that are out of our control. And so I like to think about what is our job. And here I'm not using a lot of specifics with these roles because I really want you to sit down and do the process yourself. And I do strongly encourage you to work with me, obviously, on this because it's not as simple as it sounds, but or join a group. We do projects like this in our groups and work through them, and you do homework and follow up. The groups are much more than just the meeting, though they don't take a tremendous amount of time. It's a lot of practicing and integrating, but the learnings are powerful. And when you have clarified these things, your life is completely different on the other side. And so some language about what is your job. For many of us, our job is to love our parents, love our children, love our spouses. For many of us, our job is to model healthy behavior, model good choices, model taking care of our bodies, model being kind, model being loving, model not taking responsibility for things that are out of our control, model not beating ourselves up, model not judging others and judging ourselves harshly, not being mean to ourselves, model compassion, for example. There's so many things that you can think about here when you use this different language, making sure that these are things that are actually your job. So with our children, our job is to model how to be a healthy adult, how to model be a parent who does set boundaries, who teaches, for example. Teaching is many of our jobs. As a physician, we teach. As a coach, I teach. As parents, we teach. And so I do love this word teaching. And teaching is sharing knowledge. So for many of us, having knowledge is our job. Having experience is our job. Being trained is our job. Showing is another one. Supporting is another one. Partnering is another thing that can be our job. Thinking about this language, listening is very much our job as parents, spouses, and people in the healthcare professions. Being present is our job. Being aware is our job. Asking good questions is our job. Facilitating, potentially people connecting with things, but not actually walking them through the healthcare system might be our job. Advising is our job. Connecting is our job. Inspiring, knowing, teaching. I know I've mentioned a few of these words a few times, and just sort of playing with the language. What words resonate with you? What words are really, truly your job as a parent? And it might be, you might even have a parent of this child and a parent of this child and a parent of this child. If you have a child with special needs, your job as a parent for that child's going to be very different than your job as a parent of a young adult, for example. And in thinking the job of a parent of a toddler is very different than the job of a parent of a school-age kid, which is very different than the job of a parent of a high schooler. And so reassessing this job along the way can be really helpful. I have often mentioned what I think my job is as a mother of young adults and as a mother-in-law and as a grandmother, and choosing that job, giving yourself the job description, not the job description that someone else gives you, but the one that is aligned and authentic and reasonable for you. Knowing that, of course, nobody who listens to this podcast is an unreasonable human who doesn't work hard and doesn't care. And so almost all of you, in fact, I believe all of you can be trusted to give yourself a job description that is not lazy and is not going to do bad things for the world. Many of you might give you a job description that's too much and too hard. And so paying attention to what your job description is really, really helpful. And then just a nod to people's job descriptions for themselves as a physician or as a healthcare provider. And here I think being specific in your language again, awareness, knowledge, diagnosing, educating, recommending, being present, listening. But it is not your job to defend the healthcare system. It's not your job to fix everything, except if you're in the OR, you do have to put some things back together. It's not your job to be perfect. It's not your job not to make mistakes. Our job is to be a human who shows up with care and love and compassion and puts their best foot forward. Our job is not to change behavior. Our job is not necessarily to meet our patients' expectations. Our job is not to meet the system's expectations. Our job is to do what is within us, what we are capable of as a human. Our job is also not to fill in for all the gaps in the system. And if you happen to be a leader, I encourage you to take that role separately, because I coach many, many leaders. And the way that we show up for our leadership roles really determines how impactful we are, what kind of a leader we are. And it can be dramatically influenced by looking at who you want to be and what you want to bring to the role, and being reasonable and realistic about your expectations, and focusing on what's your job. Because many of us as leaders, and myself included until I had a lot of this training, took on things that were not our job as leaders. And many of the people you're leading don't appreciate that. And our systems often ask us to take on things as leaders that are not our job and are not within our control. And then we are frustrated and upset and exasperated. And then we also don't make the best leader. So effective leaders almost all get coaching. And in other industries, that is eminently clear. It's just not something in medicine. So I encourage any of you who are leaders, work with a coach. It's something I specialize in as a former leader, but there are many people out there, and it's really, really important if you want to incorporate leadership into your work, which is fun, and you have a lot of growth potential, but you need to do it with care. Care for yourself and care for those that you are leading. And I think that leadership probably needs an entire episode. And I actually have a thought of a brilliant guest I'm planning to bring on to talk about it, who's a very successful female leader, which is also a bit of a different role. But pay attention as a leader to lead from your values, to model your values, to live by them in every one of your roles. Everyone in medicine to some degree is a leader. And I think, in fact, we all want to show up as if we're leaders. And leaders, whether we partner, inspire, motivate, supervise, teach, all those things, it's the energy with which we do it. In one of my favorite books, Shauna Shapiro's book, she talks about the approach or the attitude. And the attitude is the tone and energy. And the tone and energy that you choose is incredibly important. I hope that this exercise has been helpful, and I encourage you to think about, what is your job? What is not your job? What kind of language do you want to use to describe your job? Where have you made things your job that are not your job, and how is that impacting your life? And what might your life be like if you focused on things that were actually your job? How might you experience life if you were not showing up over responsible, over functioning, over busy, and overwhelmed? I am going to do a Curious About Coaching session on this topic in January. This is the time of year where I do my free Curious About Coaching workshops with the intention of having you all sign up for ongoing presence and transition well. I do believe that these programs are super life-changing, and that's the feedback I get every time. But whether or not you decide to join, you can take part in these free sessions. I offer them because many people are skeptical. They're skeptical of coaching. They want a little bit of a flavor. Are we a good fit? What's my style? What kinds of things do I offer and do? And how do I show up for people? And so feel free to join, whether or not you plan on joining one of those groups. So I strongly encourage you to join one of those groups if you are a woman in medicine. And if you're not, reach out to see what other options are available for coaching, because it will really change your life. And I will put the show notes to sign up for Curious About Coaching sessions I'll put the link to sign up for Curious About Coaching sessions in the show notes. I will put the links about ongoing presence and transition well small group coaching. In both of those, you get quite a bit of leadership coaching, and many people in transition well are switching into leadership roles. So it's a great place to find community and belong. And both of those programs start towards the end of January. So there's time and not too much time, as both of the programs are small. I limit my groups to 10 to 12 people max so that everyone gets lots of personal attention and it feels like a very safe, loving, and supportive community. Thank you all so much for listening today. I hope you gleaned some wisdom, and I hope you enjoy spending some time noodling around about what might actually be your job and noticing in your day what might you be spending a lot of energy on that's not actually your job. Reach out with questions, and we will see you next week.
Thanks so much for joining us.
We encourage you to dive into the show notes for each episode for more learnings and resources.
We also invite you to take a listen to the many other Mindful Healers podcast episodes, and please share the podcast far and wide with colleagues, friends, and family.
If our message and approach resonate with you, we would love to work with you.
When you listen to a podcast, you consume information, but when you work with us, you can actually practice and change.
We offer coaching and mindfulness experiences, talks, workshops, retreats, and more. Connect with us at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
The content of this podcast is not medical or life advice. We invite you to participate in the mindful moments we offer at the end of most of our podcasts, but please only do so safely.
Welcome to today's mindful moment, a moment of compassion, acceptance, and kindness. Considering that after listening to this episode, you might recognize that you have been taking on things that were not your job. You may have been taking on things that are not yours to hold and not yours to own. And that with that realization, often we go to judgment. How come I did this? How did I get here? And my invitation here is to simply bring your hands to heart if it's safe to do so, and close eyes if it's safe to do so, and find your breath. Reconnect to the breath. And take a moment here, hand on hand, hand on heart, melting that cortisol, stress, judgment hormone, sending yourself kindness and oxytocin, recognizing that until this moment, you knew what you knew. You couldn't know what you didn't know. And now, with new information, you can choose to move forward differently. You can choose to move forward from a place of kindness and love. And you can choose what you would like to be your job and let go of what is not your job. And if you notice angst coming up, anxiety, worry, what will happen if I don't do it? I might offer, what will happen if you do? Might other people never learn? Might they never grow? Might they just give you more jobs? What if you don't do it, creating a vacuum? It either doesn't need to be done, maybe it gives someone else agency, maybe it boosts their self-esteem, maybe it offers an opportunity to someone else. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. It's not your job to reassign all the jobs that are not yours. Taking in another big deep breath, a huge exhale, acknowledging any angst or stress you may feel with kindness. Remembering that what's your job is to focus on what's your job, to be the best human that you can be, to show up with love and kindness and compassion, to show up mindfully, to be present, to be patient, to be accepting, to not judge. Taking in one more big deep breath, melting into the softness that potentially you feel now. And I invite you to explore this exercise further on your own, remembering this mindful moment, remembering the importance of bringing compassion and kindness to the project, remembering forgiveness, flexibility, and non-judgment, remembering the breath, remembering the feel of the oxytocin, pressing the heel of the hand into the heart, remembering the top hand, massaging the bottom hand, feeling the lightness and spaciousness. May you all be well. May you all be safe. And may you all move forward with a little bit less overwhelm, over responsibility, over commitment, over functioning, over busy, and any other overs you may specialize in. May you all move forward a little bit more light, a little bit more calm, and a little bit more peaceful. Slowly lower hands and open eyes. Thank you all for joining me for this practice today, and we will see you next week.